Hey everyone, and welcome back to a very kind of different video. I'm doing a lot of kind of experimental content at the minute, and this is a video that has been something I felt I should make for months now. Like at least 6, not longer. I guess I've had to take some time and do a lot of healing and a lot of work on myself and who I am, and kind of work through a lot of stuff and figure a lot of stuff out. And I'm gonna have a glass of wine while we do this, which is another new thing for me. Normally when you see me waving a wine glass around in a video, there is a soft drink in there. As a lot of you know, it's usually, you know, an energy drink or orange juice or lemonade or something nice like that. But today, the other thing is, this is my bedroom. Welcome. I made a little kind of vow with myself to never film videos in my bedroom, because this is kind of my personal space, my almost like sacred space. This is where I sleep, this is where I rest, this is my out of work time. But today, because this is quite like a personal and emotional video, I just kind of want to be in my little safe zone. Kyra's sleeping down the end of the bed. Got my little Lulzykins with me, who is my little lamb who I've had forever, and she's like my best little girl, aren't you? I just, yeah, kind of want to be in my little safe zone, my little whatever this is. I guess the kind of weird thing is, with all the sort of crap that's been thrown at me recently, it's made me not only realise that now I kind of feel ready to talk about this stuff, and I want to put it out there, and I want to help other people with it. I want to correct a lot of misinformation that's out there. But I've also realised that I finally am actually strong enough to do this, and it feels quite good, you know? You guys know some of the stuff I've been going through. Some of it's been very public. The name calling from Gabbie, the fallout with Jimmy, and some of it has been a little more private. So what you guys don't know is that I had a few little health scares recently, and this is going to be a little over personal and oversharing now, but here we go. That's what I'm doing in this video. I've had issues for a while with very painful periods, and as part of kind of trying to figure out what was wrong with me and what the issue was there, one of the things that they were checking for was cancer, and that terrified me. Even just hearing the word sent me into a bit of a mess and a bit of a spin, and I was a bit of a wreck behind the scenes, but completely got the all clear yesterday. I am fine. There's no cancer, no cysts, no fibroids, no nothing scary down there, nothing serious, nothing big, and it, God, it is like the biggest weight off my shoulders. There are still some issues. They think it's more of a hormonal thing, so my GP is going to kind of discuss options with me, and we're going to be trying some different birth control options and methods and stuff, and basically just trial and error and seeing what works. But the important thing is, it is nothing serious, and God, it feels good to say that. Oh my God, okay, sorry, so that's out of the way. So, again, this kind of confronting your own mortality thing, or like questioning it at least, has again been messing with my head. And I come out this other side feeling way stronger about things, and just very happy and very grateful to be where I am now, as opposed to where I was, for example, 6 months ago or this time last year. So as you might know, if you saw my little breakdown at Christmas, I had a pretty horrible time last year because I was in a relationship with a man who has narcissistic personality disorder, essentially. And while it's important to say that, well, actually there's a lot of things to say here. Being a narcissist in the colloquial sense and having narcissistic personality disorder are not the same thing. They're very different, and I'm not just talking about someone who's a bit full of himself here. I'm talking about someone with actual, real problems and issues who hurts people. Now, not all narcissists are abusers, and not all abusers are narcissists, but narcissistic abuse is a very specific type of abuse, and it's very serious, and it's what I suffered through and what I came out the other side of. And while I'm not a psychologist myself, I'm not a doctor myself, I am going to be referring to a book written by Dr Ramani Durvasula, who she makes videos here on YouTube, but she's also written this incredible book called Should I Say Stay or Should I Go? Surviving a Relationship with a Narcissist. And this book literally changed my life. It opened my eyes. It helped me see so many of the issues that were there in front of me, but that I just was basically turning my head to and was blind to and making excuses for. And this is the book that kind of finally properly got me to leave and move on and start healing again. So while I'm not a psychologist myself, I'm going to be referring to this book throughout this video, and we're going to be kind of like reading bits out, and then based on what's in here and what the actual professionals say, I'm just going to be sharing my experience and what that was like for me. And hopefully, basically I'm just finally trying to open up, because the few times that I have before and the few times I've tried to, other people have come forward to me and said, this really helped, I've been through a similar thing, it's nice to know I'm not alone. And so that's what I want to do with this video. That's why I'm making this. This isn't a, oh, pity me kind of thing, because don't pity me. I'm out the other side now. I'm stronger, I'm healing, I'm getting better. But what I want to do is normalize having these conversations and normalize people talking about when they have been victims of abuse and when they are survivors of abuse, and make sure that we're able to talk about this without any stigma, make sure other people know you're not alone, and hopefully kind of talk you through some ways that I helped myself heal and get out of it, and maybe help you guys identify some warning signs or some red flags, or just whatever really. The other thing is that recently, with a certain someone especially, the word narcissist and narcissistic abuse has been flying around a hell of a lot, and I know the person who was saying it to me and calling me those names was doing it for attention and to cause a fuss and to make some money and to go viral or whatever it is, but using those words towards someone like me who has suffered for months at the hand of someone who was a narcissistic abuser, it hurt more than I can say, and I don't think it's okay for people to just be throwing those words around just for the sake of it and for fun and to be a little bit controversial. What Jonnie did to me for months on end, both the kind of psychological and emotional abuse and the physical abuse, and how I had to end up calling the police and getting them involved in the end, it's incomparable to reviewing some poetry, you know? And to even make those comparisons for the sake of attention is upsetting. And again, one of the things I want to do with this video is kind of call attention to that and make sure people know that this is not okay, and kind of re-educate hopefully the person who was saying those things, but more importantly the wider audience as well, so you guys know the truth and you guys know the facts, I guess. So as you can see, this book is very well loved and well read and well noted in. Well, oh god, the other thing that was so hard about reading this book when I first came out of things is she gives a fictional case study in the beginning of a couple called Rachel and John, and while the details were different, the actions, it was like reading something that someone else had written about my relationship, and it was tough, but it helped me in a way, and I powered through it and got to the meat of the book, and that all really helped me. So the author of this book, just to give you a little bit of background about her and who she is, at the time of writing this book, she had been a professor of psychology at California State University, Los Angeles for 16 years, and while there, she had been the recipient of a decade of research funding from the National Institute of Health to examine personality disorders in a very specific way as they relate to health and disease. So this woman knows about narcissistic personality. She has built a whole career on it and other personality disorders. She knows what she's talking about. I trust her. And reading this book was, like I say, not just that first chapter, but the entire thing was like reading about my specific relationship, and it was eye-opening, to say the least. She notes right in the beginning, in the first chapter I think it is, that I consistently noted it is that sometimes we can change behaviours in people with narcissistic personality disorders, but the changes often do not stick around for the long term. It is in relationships that people with narcissistic personalities inflict the greatest damage. This book is predicated on one simple secret: narcissists are not going to change. And while that was a really, really hard thing for me to take in and hear and believe, ultimately, once I did start to believe that and understand that, I realised that there was no going back to Jonnie. For so long it had been on and off and on and off, and he'd hurt me, we'd fight, we'd break up, he'd apologise, we'd get back together, or he'd hurt me, we'd fight, we'd break up, he'd convince me it was all my fault, and I'd apologise and we'd get back together. And it went on and on and on like that for so long, and it was only when I started speaking to my friends about it, because he's, I don't know if it was a conscious decision, but he definitely discouraged me from speaking to my friends about the relationship, and so I didn't have anyone else looking at it, I didn't have anyone else weighing in, I was very, very isolated, and because of that I could keep kind of convincing myself that this was fine, it was normal, it was all going to be okay, and you know, he could get better, he would get better, because that was another thing he kept telling me, I'm gonna change, I'm gonna get better, I'm gonna improve, I'm gonna go to therapy. He never did. And so once I finally started speaking to my friends, especially like Sam and another YouTuber, Navadia, especially when I started speaking to them about it, they kind of helped open my eyes to what a lot of the problems were. And then I read this book, and then I realised that it was all lies and whatever, and he wasn't going to change, it was never going to get better. I just had to leave if I wanted to be happy, and I needed to put myself first and look after myself before anything else, you know? So let's take a look at a few definitions. She writes that narcissistic personality disorder and other personality disorders are different than psychiatric patterns considered more syndromal, like major depression. Personality disorders are patterned ways of responding to the world and of responding to one's inner world. Under times of stress, these patterns become even stronger. Because they are patterns, they are also predictable. The DSM-5 defines narcissistic personality disorder as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. It is further characterised as variable and vulnerable self-esteem with attempts at regulation through attention and approval seeking in either overt or covert grandiosity. And we're going to be looking at more specifics about what this means and the actual specific kind of traits and I guess kind of red flags and things you can look out for. We're going to be going through them kind of one by one throughout this video, and I'll be talking about my personal experiences with them. The person with narcissistic personality disorder is typified by symptoms including fantasies of unlimited success, beauty or ideal love, the belief that he is special and unique, entitlement, interpersonal exploitation, envy, arrogance, superficial close relationships, and low levels of insight. Narcissism is ultimately a disorder of self-esteem. Narcissist grandiosity, quest for greatness, and braggadocio can result in people viewing them as confident, smart, and successful, which they may ostensibly be. However, you only need to scrape away with your fingernail to reveal that under the shiny top coat are people who cannot regulate their feelings and exist to obtain the approval of others. On days they receive praise, they have a great day. On days they are criticised, it's all doom and gloom. It's easy to feel as though you're on a roller coaster, and it absolutely was. The relationship was so up and down and unpredictable. I was constantly walking on eggshells as to not upset him or make him angry. It was terrifying. And as we'll kind of talk about later as well, being around someone like that makes your own emotions really unpredictable, and you become really vulnerable yourself, and you know, anything could make him flip, which would make me upset, which means that on any day I had no idea what my emotions were going to be, and it was all over the place, and it was difficult. This is a really important thing to talk about because, and to give you some stats here, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men has been the victim of domestic violence, and domestic violence represents 21% of violent crime in the US. And while for narcissistic abuse, it's not always physical violence, it can be emotional abuse. I mean, those stats are just talking about domestic violence, which is one of the things I experienced, and one of the things that Jonnie's exes all experienced as well. It's kind of one of the defining traits of him. The fact that so many people go through this is why it's important to talk about and make sure that no one feels alone, and make sure we can support the people in our lives that are going through it, that we don't victim blame, that us that have gone through it don't feel alone as well. It's very, very important to normalise talking about this stuff until this kind of violence and abuse stops being normal. One of the big questions that I have been asking myself over the last 6 months is like, how much of it was real, and how much of his feelings for me were real, and did he ever love me like he said he did? That's been hard. Because he was a pathological liar. He lied constantly and about everything, and he would say whatever the hell he wanted to get what he wanted. And so, did he ever love me, or was he just saying that to use me and get what he wanted? And was he even capable of love? Again, Dr. Ramani writes that Narcissists fall in love, and quite often. However, it's often a rather superficial experience focused on variables such as excitement, validation, appearance and success. Even so, love is very real for them, and it is unfair and inaccurate to say that a narcissist is incapable of love. It is often love light, a surface level experience that is usually quite seductive and sweeping, then dissolves into something uncomfortable and empty when day-to-day life sets in. It's often a rather grandiose experience with numerous references to falling in love at first sight and a once-in-a-lifetime love story. And again, this is just like the typification of what it was like with Jonnie. He was always telling me that like he'd never felt this way before. I wasn't like the other girls. And again, red flag, lots of stories about his crazy exes and so on. And but we'll get to that in a minute. But it was always kind of like him putting me on this pedestal and saying like, this is different. It's not going to be like it was with them because this is different. You're special, we're special, we have something special. And stupid me believed that. Maybe he did too, and that's why it's kind of so hard to get your head around. But regardless of whether it was real or not, I have to remember that it wasn't healthy and it didn't do me any good, and ultimately he hurt me. And so it doesn't matter if he loved me or not. It doesn't matter if it was real love or superficial love or whatever you call it, because he hurt me. And you don't hurt people you love. It's just not acceptable. Now, one of the things that really helped me in this book, and I'm not going to read it out in this video because it's very long, but if you're going to go and get this book, should I say stay or should I go, I really recommend this little quiz inside it. And normally I kind of mock these silly quizzes in books, right? You know, we've done it with Haley DeMarco, I'm doing it in an upcoming Girl Defined video. It's all kind of very silly and like, oh, what can you really tell from a quiz in a book? But actually, in this case, going through this quiz, basically it's a, is your partner a narcissist? But it's less of a silly, frilly quiz and more of a ask yourself these questions and reflect on your relationship kind of thing. And going through these and realising how many checks essentially Jonnie had, I was like, I've been kidding myself. And it was such an eye-opener. You know, stuff like, does your partner seem cold or unfeeling in the face of your feelings or the feelings of other people? Do they seem to have difficulty understanding the feelings of other people? And I was like, yes, yes, yes. And I listed off like 10 examples in my head of times Jonnie had done that. You know, these aren't just like one-off things. These are patterns of behaviour, things he would do again and again and again. Does your partner regularly lie, leave out important details, or give you inconsistent information? And I was like, every single time we're together. And this is kind of what started making me realise there's 30 questions here, and I think Jonnie scored something like 26 out of 30 the first time I did this and went through it, and I was like, oh, well, okay then. Now, we're going to be kind of like going on and talking about what Ramani calls the narcissist checklist here, which is a list of kind of behaviours that most narcissists show or display in repeated patterns. So for example, lying. This isn't just a one-off lie, this is a repeated pattern of lying. This is, in Jonnie's case, you know, pathological lying. And I'm also now just realising how loud Kara's snores are and that she's closer to the microphone than me, so I'm so sorry if it's loud. I'll do what I can to remove it in post, but I'm not great with audio, so I'm very sorry. But she's fast asleep and I don't want to move her because she looks adorable right now. Other things as well, like, you know, never taking responsibility, poor boundaries, infidelity, lack of empathy, angry and rageful. Like I say, these aren't just one-off behaviours, these are repeated patterns that we're looking for. And like I say, Jonnie displayed pretty much every single one of these, I think, at some point or another, on multiple occasions. As Ramani writes, this checklist is designed to help you identify the kinds of traits and patterns you may have encountered in your relationship. Once you determine the traits and patterns, the next step is to learn how to respond to these patterns and this person, which is exactly why I'm making this video. I want to help you identify them so you can know to avoid them or figure out some way of dealing with them in your own life or relationship or whatever. And I should also add as well, this isn't just partners who are guilty of narcissistic abuse. Parents can do it too. Work colleagues can do it too. Friends can do it too. So analyse the relationships in your life, you know? She writes, keep in mind, we are all guilty of some of these things some of the time. But it's important to think about how patterned or typical these behaviours are. Most of us will behave in an entitled or jealous manner here or there. It is the consistency of these maladaptive patterns that makes them problematic. And this, again, was another massive eye-opener for me, because Jonnie would always throw things back in my face. Like, he'd be like, oh, well, I did this, but you did this, you know, and it would be like, well, I'm angry right now, but you're angry right now, or you were angry the other day, or you did this, or, oh yeah, I'm jealous now, but you were jealous the other day, and often there was a good reason for that, you know, whereas for his, less so. But again, we'll talk about those in a minute. And it was him throwing them back in my face like that, being like, well, you're doing this, that made me think, God, I'm terrible, I'm awful, I'm in the wrong here, I need to change, I need to work on this. So I would go away and try and change and do these things and work on different things, and I'd read books, I'm trying to be better and doing this and this and this. And then I realised afterwards that, but these weren't patterns of behaviour for me, these were one-off little cases, whereas Jonnie was doing it over and over and over and over again. And I would be like, okay, well, you've done this here, and he'd be like, but you did this. You know, so let's call his incident number 1, and my incident would be A. And then incident 2 would come up, and he would go back to incident A and say, but you did it. And then incident 3 would come up, and he would go back and point to incident A. Do you know what I mean? So I'd only done this once, but he used that one thing as an excuse to get away with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and say we were both equal. And not excusing incident A at all, but very different to have a one-off, I don't know, maybe like emotional outburst and then apologise and work on it and change, than to have these repeated behaviours that you never acknowledge or change or work on, you know? Again, like as an example, Jonnie would often tell me stories of his crazy exes, but then this later came out to be that he had a lot of the same problems that me and him had in these other relationships, and I've now spoken to some of his exes and it's a whole other story. Basically, he lied about everything to me. That's the thing. But occasionally some of the things would slip through and he'd tell me about, you know, him serially cheating on his exes with tens of people. Or he would tell me about, you know, like incidents of violence with his exes, or he would tell me about this and this and this and all these other things. And then he'd turn around to me if I was being emotional, for example, or if I was feeling insecure, or if I was feeling a little like jealous and paranoid, which turns out now I was fully right to. But in those cases when I would be feeling like that, he'd turn around to me and go, were you like this in your other relationships? I bet you were like this, weren't you? You've always been like this. Were you like this? And I'd be like, no. This is the first time I've experienced anything like this. And he was constantly kind of picking at me and looking for patterns and trying to kind of like be like, yo, you're always like this, you've done this before, blah, blah, blah. When in fact, no. Yeah, there have been times, of course, in the past when maybe I've been jealous or I've been insecure or, you know, these one-off incidents again, but it wasn't a pattern of behaviour like it was for him. And it took me so long to see that and understand that. And again, eye-opening. And I actually went back to a guy that I dated for a little while and said to him, hey, was I ever like this or this or this? And if I was, I'm really sorry. And he turned around to me and he was like, no, what are you on about? And I was like, no, but Jonnie says I'm always like this, and he says like this, and so I must have done it. And, you know, his ex was like, no, you're fine, no. But again, when I spoke to Jonnie's exes, so I won't go into too much detail, but there was a woman that he dated 7 years ago, I want to say, and another woman that he dated just before me, who, again, probably should have been a red flag. She was like 21 and he was 35. He has a thing for younger and vulnerable women, which again is a pattern, but let's not go into that right now. So after the last lot of like death threats from Jonnie and the harassing emails for months, and I got the police involved, I actually reached out to Jonnie's ex before me, and they were only seeing each other for like a matter of weeks or months, I think, but she was only 21, and so I reached out to her, I'm like, are you okay? Like, he didn't hurt you, did he? This is what happened to me, are you okay? And she was like, oh no, he didn't hurt me, but he showed, and she described basically some, I guess, like red flags or warnings or signs of kind of emotional abuse. And she was like, so I broke up with him because I didn't want this and blah blah blah. Whereas he told me she was a what was he? Apparently she was a coke addict with anger issues who he broke up with because he didn't want to deal with that crazy. And then I spoke to her and it could not have been like more of the opposite. He described her reasons for breaking up with him. It blew my mind. I can't remember where the point I was going with this was, but patterns of behaviour, that's it. So this wasn't just a one-off experience of Jonnie being, you know, Jonnie and me being wrong for each other and we were just in an unhealthy relationship. No. This is something he's done with, to my knowledge, at least 4 other women over the last 15 years. And I have no doubt he will go on to keep doing it to other women. The point is, if you find yourself a partner who is showing these traits and you get it in your mind that, well, I can fix them, they'll be different for me, it'll be different this time, I'm their saviour or whatever it is you want to think. No. If there's a pattern of behaviour, that pattern of behaviour is going to continue. And it's hard to accept, really hard to accept, but it's so important that you do. So let's jump into this checklist. So number 1 on Dr. Ramani's checklist is lack of empathy, and she writes, it is the inability to identify with or recognise the experiences and feelings of other people. Basically, narcissists do not care or understand how other people feel and rarely consider other people's feelings in their actions or words. I had this constantly. They will often say cruel things in an offhand manner and are oblivious to the pain that they cause with their words. If they aren't feeling something, then it's not happening or it doesn't matter. If they're joyful, you will be labelled as a buzzkill if you're not operating at the same level of joy, regardless of your current state of mind. I had this all the time. I remember one time in particular, Jonnie got mad at me because I was having like a really bad day, and I think I was on my period and I was in a lot of pain. And again, coming back to stuff we were talking about in the beginning, when I have a bad period, well, when I have a period, the pain is horrific. I can't leave bed, I often throw up. Even with painkillers, it's overwhelmingly painful. There's a lot of stuff, and I just have these horrible days. And he would always tell me, like, if I was feeling ill, that I was bringing his day down, that I was killing his mood, that I shouldn't be there if I was just going to bring him down, you know? It was horrific. Or this one time I remember he was like, come on over to mine, come on over. And I was like, I'm not feeling in a very good place today, I'm not in a very good mood, I don't think I'll be very fun. And he was like, no, come over. So I did. And I took a train from Leeds to Hull, which is about an hour. And then I took a bus from the station to his, which is another half hour, plus my walk to the train station, plus walks from the bus stop. Anyway, the point is, it took me probably 2 and a bit hours to get to Jonnie's house. And when I got there, he told me I was killing his mood and I should just go home. Again, the lack of empathy, the lack of awareness for anyone else's feelings other than his own is just, it was constant. She writes, it can leave you feeling misunderstood, isolated and confused. It's literally as though you only exist when you're useful. Exactly what it was like. Narcissists walk through life assuming their concerns are of paramount importance to everyone they meet. Yeah. And then we get feelings of grandiosity and entitlement, which again is just the epitome of Jonnie. So she writes, grandiosity is a pattern in which a person tends to exaggerate accomplishments, talents, connections and relationships, and experiences. They do not have to be real experiences. Grandiose people also tend to maintain over-the-top fantasy worlds. They talk about what is coming in the future. It can also be manifested by a sense of self-importance, a belief that their existence is bigger and more important than anyone else's, and certainly more important than yours. Constantly. Jonnie would always tell me how back in the Netherlands, when he was living there, back in Amsterdam, he was the best DJ. He was booked out in every club. He had this. He was so popular, and he did this, and he met these people, and he did this, and he was so important. And he wooed me with these stories when we met, and I just use the word woo, don't judge me for that, but he did. And I was like, this is great. This is a guy who's successful, and he knows what he's doing, and he's creative, and he's wonderful, and I loved that. Turns out a lot of it was just like a bunch of crap, but that's what narcissists do. They win you in with this charisma and this charm and these stories, and then it all turns out to be rubbish. They keep talking about the grandiose fantasies. When they do not materialise, they get frustrated, and the disconnect between reality and the grandiose fantasy can make the narcissist angry, frustrated, sullen, and prone to lashing out. I experienced this. They become angry at the world for not delivering on the big promises they made for themselves in their head. Absolutely, and it was hell to live with. Because Jonnie was telling me all this stuff about, at one point he was making £10,000 a month, and he was doing this, and he was doing this and this, and I'm like, so where are your savings? why are you currently homeless and living with your parents and jobless and unemployed with nothing to your name? I didn't put it together at first, but again, after a while, I started questioning it. I'm like, if you're so successful, if you're so great, if you have all this great stuff, why do you currently have nothing? It was either he's incredibly irresponsible or he's making this stuff up. Honestly, it could have been either. Again, with this as well, I remember one time he said to me something like, oh, with your talent and my talent, we could be so successful, we could do everything. Should we just be millionaires? And I was like, I'm sorry, should we just what? And he was just like, yeah, let's just be millionaires. Let's decide to do it. We can do that. And he genuinely thought it was going to happen. And when I turned around to him and said, I don't want that. I don't want to be a millionaire. I don't want millions of pounds or viewers or this or that. Like, I just want to live comfortably. I want to live happily. And I want to create. And I want to make a difference in people's lives. And I want to make content that I'm proud of. And I just want to spend my days making things that I enjoy. And he couldn't get his head around that. He was like, well, why? What's the point if we're not going to be millionaires? What's the point in this? And he was genuinely so sure that he was going to be this big millionaire and he was going to be so successful, and he was going to have all these material things and he was going to have this and this and this. He never thought about how he was going to get there. He just wanted the material stuff and the success and the fame, and he just assumed it was going to happen. And it's very difficult to try and plan a life with someone like that, especially when you clearly have such different values. For me, the value was in creating. For him, the value was in the money and the fame. This ties into the sense of entitlement, you know? So pathological narcissists believe their own height. The type of people who go around saying, do you know who I am? Entitlement is a belief that one should be accorded special treatment, typically without reason or cause. Entitlement involves the belief that everyone should comply with one's demands, no matter how unreasonable they are. They will become angry, frustrated, or even downright confused if their needs are not met on their terms. And then Dr. Ramani points out that one of the big red flags for this is looking at how they treat service employees. And again, this is a big thing with Jonnie that I didn't notice for a long time because pandemic and lockdown and we weren't around service employees. But one night we got a bad curry delivered through Deliveroo, and Deliveroo were a bit like, we can give you a partial refund but not the whole thing, is that okay? And he got so angry, he just flipped. And on my Deliveroo account, on a live chat with a customer service person, he called them the C word, and he called them an effing this and an effing that. And I was like, you can't do this under my... Well, you can't do this anyway, but you can't do this under my name. Like, this is not okay. So I literally had to wrestle the phone from him and then like grovel with these customer service employees and be like, I'm so sorry, that was my boyfriend, that was completely unacceptable, the refund is great, thank you so much, we'll order some different food. It was embarrassing. And he saw nothing wrong with it. He thought I was in the wrong for apologising to them for them just doing their job, you know? And like, I get it. You know, everyone gets a little annoyed at maybe like a customer service person here or there, or like, you know, if someone's screwing up and they're not helping you, like, it's okay to get frustrated at that kind of thing, it's acceptable. But taking it so far as to call someone an effing C word because they didn't give you the full refund, they only gave you like a 75% refund, is not okay ever, anywhere. 16? I love you. Thank you for lightening the mood. You get yourself comfy. Right there. Got a kiss? Thank you. Love you too. So the next big thing is manipulation or being manipulative, and I'm sure we kind of all roughly know what this means. But Ramani writes, narcissists are masterful at twisting the situation and working the rules to get what they want. They will turn things around in such a way that you may ultimately give them what they want and exhaust yourself in the process. When a person is so skillfully manipulative, you may find yourself falling into his trap, and remaining relatively unaware it is happening. Years later, when you connect the dots, the manipulations are clear as day, but at the time we often miss it. And this was a thing that happened to me, and it wasn't until specifically Sam pointed out certain things, saying this is manipulative, this is not okay, this is inappropriate of him to do, that I started to realise it. And looking back, there was so much manipulation, just constantly. Too much to talk about, but one of the examples that is given here is, you know, early in a relationship, the manipulation is most often emotional. For example, I had a tough childhood, so sometimes I say things I don't mean. This was what Jonnie did right from the beginning. It was, I have a bad ex, so sometimes I lash out, sometimes I do this, blah, blah. He used this bad ex, this crazy ex, as an excuse for all the bad things he did. And in turn, he got me to hate his ex. I despised her with a passion. And now I realise that while she wasn't perfect, so much of it was just Jonnie being awful to her and not her being awful at all. So he would always tell stories of this crazy ex who did this and this and this, and she was awful and she cheated on him and this and blah, blah, and that's why he was damaged now and he found it hard to trust and he didn't do this and this and why he wouldn't do this and so on. But in reality, he was the one hurting her. He was the one physically assaulting her. He was cheating on her constantly with anyone he could find. He's the one who nearly gave her an STD. He's the one who did this and this and this and this. And God, he made me hate her so much for so long. And now I feel quite bad about it. But again, I now realise it was the manipulation. And he was somehow getting me to direct any worries I had about Jonnie or any dislike I had for anything he'd done. He was so subtle as well. He was getting me to direct it all at her. And he tried it a little bit with the ex before her as well. But that backfired, because at one point she kind of tried to reach out to me and warn me about Jonnie, but he put a stop to it. But it turns out I'm quite good friends with her now, and she's a lovely person. So, there we go. Anyway, the point is manipulation. The next thing is angry and rageful. And there's a whole thing here about the difference between like healthily expressed anger and how that's a normal feeling and emotion, and you know, don't feel bad about it, and how that is different to rage and kind of uncontrollable rage. As she says, rage is a different animal. It is out of control, ramps up quickly, and can rapidly spin into violence and aggression, abusive language, and fear in those who are witnessing it or on the receiving end, which is basically like every night with Jonnie. For people who are narcissistic, rage is often a manifestation of internal frustration. It tends to appear when their fragile self-esteem is endangered. And phrases like that can kind of make us feel sorry for people. It's like, oh, well, they're insecure, so they're lashing out. But when you're actually there and you're experiencing this rage, when you're the victim of the rage, when you're the one being hit or thrown on the ground or kicked, when you're the one having names thrown at you, when you're the one being told you're this and this and this and this, when you're the one having your things smashed up, when you're the one having phones thrown at your head, when you're on the other end of it, it's not okay. Rage may be manifested in different forms. Beyond physical violence and throwing of objects, it can also be witnessed in disruptive screaming, jags, driving in an angry manner that is potentially dangerous. He did this at some points. I had to leave the car. It was terrifying. Storming out of rooms and slamming doors upon exiting. Because it happens so quickly, it can catch you off guard and feel even more threatening. You will want to avoid it, so you end up walking on eggshells, becoming anxious and fearful of talking to them about anything for fear of the rapid, rageful reaction. And that was exactly it. Because of kind of how things were with Jonnie, I would get angry at him at times, and I'm not proud of it. And I said things that I'm not proud of. I called him names that I'm not proud of, things like that. And I recognise now, looking back, that they were completely wrong. And when I said them afterwards, I did feel bad. I did try and make up for it, which I don't think he felt the same. But again, there's a difference there between understanding what you did wrong and trying to fix it, and also when your anger is building and building and building and building, and it's almost encouraged, this build is almost encouraged by some of the other kind of traits that we're going to talk about soon. I don't want to say it's understandable, but it's explainable at least. Whereas for Jonnie, it would go from, oh, Ragey Rage, I love you, Ragey Rage, you're so beautiful, Ragey Rage, to you effing, sorry, in like 2 minutes. it was just a switch that flipped. It would be, oh, I love you, you're so gorgeous, just scrunching my cheeks up and stuff, to literally throwing things at my head in 2-3 minutes. That would be the difference. It was like a switch. And that should be scary, and that should be terrifying, and that should be something that a lot of people would see and they would run away from. But he reminded me so much of my dad. That is exactly how my dad would get angry when I was a kid. That is exactly how my dad would behave. He would be the loveliest, friendliest, you know, snuggliest person one minute, and then throwing things around the house the next, smashing things up the next, shouting and stomping and slamming doors and hurling plates of food across the room. And you never knew when it was going to change and when it was going to happen, and it was instant. And my mum's actually said that, because she's never spoken to me about this, but she said to my sister that when she's heard me telling stories about Jonnie in my videos, she's like, that's your dad right there. And it is, and she's not going to like me for saying this, I know that, but I think that's why I didn't get out sooner, and I think that's why I excused it for so long, and why I was like, I can fix him, this is fine, it'll change, because I grew up with this, and for me, it's normal for a man to behave like that. That's how I saw all the men in my life behaving growing up. My dad, my brother, they all did it. For me, what's abnormal are these well-adjusted men. You know, people like Dan, who, me and Dan would fight, but when there was anger, it was gradual, and it was normal, and it was still respectful, and it was things we could both deal with and come back together with afterwards and say, I get why you're angry. I get why you were angry. Let's resolve this. It was never, ever, ever to the same level as it was with Jonnie or my dad. And now I know I deserve better. Now I know that that's not okay. And now I know no more making excuses. And I think in some ways I've gone a little too far the other way, and I'm a little zero tolerance about it all, which again is something to work on. But at this point in my life, I'm better to have that than make excuses for that kind of anger, you know? Next up we have Paranoia and Jealousy, which again kind of linked. Jonnie wasn't quite so much paranoid, but he was definitely irrationally jealous at random moments, and there's a few in particular that stick out in my head, and this has just been like a... So as I was preparing for this video and going back through this book again, I finally put something together, and if it's true, it's upsetting, but... So Dr. Ramani writes that jealousy is often a great litmus test of whether or not your partner is actually the one cheating. If he starts accusing you of cheating out of the blue, you can bet the farm on the fact that if he is not already cheating, he's likely engaging in some form of inappropriate relationship that may be ready to veer in that direction. Basically saying, if he's jealous about something, it's probably because he's done it himself. And there's one particular moment of jealousy that just stands out completely, and this is kind of a long story, but let me explain it to you. Jonnie had to go back to Amsterdam to drop off a van to his ex that they like co-owned and she was selling, so he'd gone back and done that. And there'd been lots of issues with his ex, and what I now realise is like triangulation and him playing us off against each other and kind of keeping her on the hook while having me and so on. And there were inappropriate messages between them that I found, sexual messages between them while we were together and stuff like that. And so he'd been in Amsterdam doing that, and on the day he got back into the country, he was like, oh, I can come see you on the way back home, like it's on my way. And I was like, okay, cool, you can do that, but I have an old friend coming over for coffee. And when I say old friend, I should mention, this was an old teacher of mine. Like, he taught me when I was 16, he came over for coffee. Obviously there was nothing going on, he used to teach me. And I said this to Jonnie, I was like, look, he's going to be here between this time and this time, come over if you want, I can see you a bit before, I can see you a bit after, whatever. So he came over before, and everything seemed fine. Oh, and I was like, oh, you know, I've just got this last bit of cleaning up to do, but you're okay, just like being around while I do that, right? And he's like, yeah, cool, all good, all fine. And then the minute Fletch left, he just turned on me and he got angry and he got nasty and he accused me of all this stuff. And he's like, I didn't come here to see you flirt with another man. I didn't come here for this. And at the time it seemed irrational and out of the blue. And now I'm like, he just got back from seeing his ex and he's the one accusing me of cheating. And you know, because he was all like, oh, I don't know what you two got up to when you were alone in your house, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, he's a married man with 2 kids and you're going to walk in the door in a minute. What do you think we did? You know, but now I'm putting it together and I'm like, okay, so he accuses me of cheating out of nowhere with someone completely, essentially random and just not even on the radar. And it's after you got back from seeing your ex. And now I'm like, well, if something didn't happen, he clearly wanted it to, you know? That's what I'm thinking. Anyway, that might be paranoia, but the point is... And she writes, this jealousy can lead him to undermine you, criticise you, and minimise your successes. Because it's not just jealousy when it comes to partners and relationships, but jealousy when it comes to things like money and work and success. And I am objectively more successful than him, despite being a lot younger, and he never liked that. And he did minimise things, and he did make me feel crappy about things, and he did undermine me and criticise me and everything. Another thing she writes about is hypersensitivity, which she says even the smallest things, for example, saying something mildly disparaging about a restaurant they like, can be interpreted as an ad hominem attack and be personalised to the point that it is an insult against them. They will even interpret ambiguous situations to fit their constant hypothesis that they are being offended or that something is personal. And this was a thing that came up time and time again, because a few times when we were first seeing each other, I said things like, can we change the music? Or, I'm not really feeling this right now, maybe we can put something else on. Or he'd say, hey, what do you think of this album? And I was like, it's good, but it's not my kind of thing. And that spiraled. That snowballed and snowballed to, you hate my music, you hate everything about me, you're so judgmental of me, you can't stand anything I do. And I was like, no, play your music, it's fine, it's just not my cup of tea. And he would blow it all out of proportion and it would get awful and it was a thing. There was one point when he was doing a DJ set in Hull when things were starting to open back up, and he was like, literally hours before we were supposed to go, he was like, you don't even like my music, you think I'm awful, I don't want you to come, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, 1, I love the music you're playing in the set, so that's not a thing, and 2, I want to be there to support you regardless of whether I do like it or not anyway. And he didn't understand that, and he blew it all out of proportion. It became this big screaming row, and I cried a lot, and it was awful. So yeah, I get that. Lack of guilt or lack of insight. She writes, narcissists will often write off the psychological bumps and bruises suffered by those in their path as opportunity cost. If they get their needs met, they tend not to focus on the needs or hurt of others. Their inability to monitor how they impact other people reflects their childlike selfishness. This is Jonnie to a T. This is one of the bits that's kind of hit me quite hard recently. So, there's something chilling about someone doing something unkind or downright nasty and not feeling any remorse about it. They may be only mildly or insincerely apologetic for glaringly bad behaviour. This can be destabilising because you're feeling distressed and upset about something done to you by your partner, but he doesn't see it as a major transgression, or he believes that an apology clears the slate. It can feel like you're losing your mind, or you're being told that you're blowing it out of proportion. And this is something Jonnie used to do all the time. So I have these really vivid memories of like phone calls when I was in tears on the phone over something he'd done, and he would be so cold and just like as though I wasn't crying, and he would just talk over me in like such a matter-of-fact way and be like, well, you're overreacting, I'm not doing this, you need to do this, you owe me an apology for being upset about this, you owe me an apology for blah blah blah. Or like one time here, we'd had this huge argument and it was nasty and it was horrible and I was in tears, I'd hurt myself and I was just crying on the floor and I was an absolute mess. And he just sat on my sofa, ignoring me being in tears, laughing at YouTube videos on his phone. And the way he could just compartmentalize things, so he could just be like, I see you're upset, I see that I've hurt you, I'm gonna ignore it and laugh at this thing on my phone, was just so cold. And honestly, looking back, it was disturbing. again, I'm not being accusing when I say this, but this is something that's kind of come up for me and been kind of hard to deal with recently, because when I saw the phone call recordings between you-know-who and Jessie Smiles, and this is something that I've actually said to Jessie and spoken to her about, I was like, when I saw those phone calls, the way that Jessie was absolutely in tears and breaking down and like on the verge of a panic attack, and just you have this person coldly speaking over them saying, no, actually you need to apologise to me. It wasn't quite as bad as what Jonnie did, but it was so similar that it was genuinely hard to watch and see that, because that is just how he would speak to me and speak over me and just have absolutely no regard for my feelings at all. And it's hard. It was hard to watch, it was hard to remember, it was hard to experience, it's hard to talk about. That's why I'm so happy that Jessie had her partner there with her, because he could, like, you know, comfort her and look after her, whereas I had no one. I was completely on my own. So when Jonnie told me I was overreacting or I was being ridiculous and just invalidated my feelings, I was just left completely alone, and it was ridiculous. I remember one night actually after an argument with Jonnie, he'd been particularly nasty, and there'd been like this huge argument, and then it had ended with him like throwing stuff at me and like throwing things around my house, and I'd just been, in the end I was like, get out of my house, just get out and leave. And eventually he did, and I remember afterwards I texted my friend Sam, and we were kind of like texting a bit, and then I called him up, and this is so ridiculous, I sat on my bathroom floor with him for probably 3 hours, absolutely in tears, just telling him everything and telling him everything that had happened, what Jonnie had said and what I'd said, and I was like, I'm so awful and I'm a terrible person, I've done this and this and this. And Sam was just so kind and empathetic, and he let me get my feelings out, and he listened and he understood, and he, you know, he essentially called me out when I had done something crappy, and also kind of corrected me when he was like, no, you did nothing wrong there, that was him. And that was the first time in months, literally months, I'd had someone actually listen to my feelings when I was hurt and hadn't told me I was wrong. And that was just such an unusual experience for me at the time that I didn't quite know how to deal with it. I think that made me more emotional, and it was just yeah, I was in a bad place that night, and I genuinely think I owe Sam, like, I have so much gratitude for him. I'm so lucky he's in my life. He's a wonderful person. He's just unrelated, but I've also just realised that I may have a weird mark on my arm. I don't know if you guys can see it at all, but just about here, I'm having a weird delayed reaction to the COVID vaccine, and it's like produced some sort of weird like allergic reaction sort of thing. It's better now, it's gone down with an antihistamine, but it's still here and kind of itchy, and it's kind of weird. And my sister-in-law's a GP, and she's been like talking me through it. I've been sending her pictures and being like, is it normal? Is this okay? And we think it's okay, but if you see anything weird on my arm, that's what it is. Sorry, felt I should throw it out there. Okay, the next thing on this list is needing constant admiration and validation. Absolutely. Narcissists need the admiration of the outside world to survive. They find it difficult to be alone. When they are alone, they're often mirrored, I don't know how you pronounce that, but they're often kind of absorbed in social media, which is basically a way to effectively receive admiration and validation without having to return it. In order to be in a relationship with a person like this, you need to be a one-person cheering squad. It is exhausting, and it really, really is. Validation is the air supply necessary to keep their fragile egos alive. This can also lead to them getting it anywhere they can. They tend to accumulate lots of superficial friendships. Typically, a relationship of depth would require too much mutual reciprocity for the narcissist, and the other person subsequently gets dissatisfied and leaves. So superficial relationships tend to serve their purpose more efficiently. Again, this is absolutely what he had. While I tend to have few but very close friends, he had lots of very superficial, like, oh, we met this one day and spent one day together and now we're friends type relationships. The next one is lying, and this is just the biggest, most huge, horrific thing that he did. It was lying constantly. pathologically lying about everything, big or small, whether it was consequential or not. He would lie about it. He lied about his drug use. He would tell me that he hadn't done any drugs and he hadn't done cocaine, but he would come back from the bathroom with powder literally still on his nose. And now, as someone who like doesn't do drugs themselves, at first I didn't have an issue with him doing them because I'm like, you know, his body, his choice, whatever. But the fact he would lie to me about it, I was like, this makes me think there's a problem. And it turns out that he did have an absolute problem with alcohol and other substances abuse. An abuse of other substances, that's what I'm trying to say. So it was an issue. He would lie to me about who he'd been speaking to, where he'd been, where he was going, who he was seeing, what he was doing. He would lie about the most minor things and the biggest things. And this is the thing as well, because sometimes his lies were dangerous. Like, if he would be at band practice and I would say to him, how much have you had to drink? And he would say, 2 beers over the night. And I'm like, great. I'll say, have you done drugs? And he would say, no. I'm like, great. And he would drive home. Because the thing is, if he was drunk or if he'd done drugs, I would say, you're not driving home, I'll pay for an Uber for you. But he would lie to me so he could drive home, and then he would endanger everyone on the road by driving after doing a crap ton of cocaine and smoking a crap ton of weed and having like 2 bottles of wine. And that is not okay. That's not just a white lie. That's not an inconsequential lie. That's a lie that's endangering people's lives, and that's not okay. Then there was the lying about things like his contact with his ex and other girls. He would lie about that sort of stuff constantly. Well, one time I got a message from his ex's new boyfriend, and based on this message I said to Jonnie, have you been in touch with Sonna today? And he said, no, we haven't spoken in months. And I said, can I see your phone? And he showed me his phone, and the call logs were empty, and the texts were empty, the emails were empty. And I said, then what do you make of this? And it was a message from Sonna's current boyfriend, and apparently the pair of them had been lying about how much contact they'd been in, and he'd been on the phone with her for like an hour whilst he was on the way to see me, and he'd been lying and covering it up and all this stuff. And I'm like, if there's nothing to hide, you wouldn't be hiding it. If it was innocent, you wouldn't be hiding it. Like when I hung out with Fletch, I told Jonnie met him. It was a thing. There was nothing to hide, so there was no issue. But the fact he was having to hide it said to me that there was something to hide. Whole things like that. Then there's the whole thing about how everything's a show, which is absolutely true. It was always about putting on a front with Jonnie, never actually doing any real work in himself, you know? Projection, being accusing someone else of what you're doing or calling out your flaws and fears in someone else is a psychological trick of the eye called projection. The person who is cheating accuses his partner of cheating. Narcissistic ego is always monitoring the world for threats and often finds them. Then they quickly blame other people for their deficits. And again, not to diagnose or accuse or anything like that, but I definitely think Gabbie was projecting when she went on her whole rant about me, saying, you're uncreative, you're untalented, you're ugly, you're, what else did she call me? She called me money hungry. Basically, when she went on her rant, calling me a bunch of names, when she called me a bitch, when she called me a narcissist, whatever, I think that was projection. Because, you know, many things are demonstratively easy to disprove. For example, her calling me uncreative. Look at my website. I create lots of things. When she called me unintelligent, that's untrue. Look at my education history and my videos. When she called me untalented, that's untrue. Look at my videos. When she called me money hungry, that's untrue. Look at my lifestyle and look at the amount of money I donate to charity and what I do with my money and how much I give back. These things are clearly untrue and false, but she said them anyway, and I can't help but feel like that was projection. Therefore, I have a little bit of sympathy for her because clearly she's saying it from a place of insecurity, and clearly she's saying this because she's unhappy with her own life, but that doesn't make it hurt any less, and that doesn't excuse it, and that doesn't make it okay. She still hurt me, and she still needs to apologise. Next thing on the list is greedy, and yes, absolutely, that was him. Emotionally cold. Again, go back to the whole phone call thing. Ramani writes about how narcissists are notoriously shallow with their emotions. This often occurs in part because of their lack of emotional empathy. Narcissistic people do not do well with emotion. It requires going deep and feeling their own emotions, which is challenging for them, and blah blah blah, this whole thing. Go back to the phone calls and the night I hurt myself, and he just blanked it. Next big thing is gaslighting, and again, this is a buzzword that is thrown around, but it's actually a very, very serious thing. It's not just, oh, I had one interpretation, you had another, but that's not gaslighting. Gaslighting is far more purposeful. So, to read you this, gaslighting qualifies as a form of emotional abuse that involves denying a person's experience and making statements such as, that never happened, you're too sensitive, or this isn't a big deal. I heard those constantly. It tends to happen gradually over time, and it leaves you feeling as though you're slowly going crazy, which I did. The gaslighter uses techniques such as withholding or stonewalling. For example, I don't want to hear that again. Heard that a lot. Contradicting, for example, telling you that you did not recall something correctly. I had that constantly. Diversion, for example, when you bring up something that concerns you and your partner turns it into something that you had said years before, or deflects it and describes it as a conspiracy. I had that all the time. He also minimises your feelings and denies events that definitely occurred. Constantly. This was probably one of the most damaging things for me. Or one of Jonnie's favourites was if I was upset about something that he'd done, for example, the contact with his ex that he lied to me about, he would tell me, this is all in your head, you're the crazy one, you need to change your medication, we need to get you to a new counsellor. It was always I needed to change. It wasn't the fact that he'd lied that was the problem, it was my response to the lying that was the problem, in his eyes and in his words, and it messed me up a lot. The damage of gaslighting is that it is confusing, isolating, and often results in you questioning your own reality. Gaslighting fills you with self-doubt, second-guessing, and hopelessness. Gaslighting is very simply a form of emotional abuse, and because it happens so gradually, it overtakes you from the inside out, leaving you isolated and so confused that you don't even know how to ask for help. Gaslighting makes communication all but impossible. This was the biggest and most damaging thing for me. It screwed me up so much. And it made me doubt myself constantly. I didn't know what to believe or think. I didn't trust my own judgment. And this is half of why the stuff that happened with Jimmy, I think, got so blown out of proportion, because Jonnie cut me off from all my other friends and I didn't feel like I had anyone else to speak to about anything. And when I tried to say to Jonnie, what do you think of this message? He was like, it's online crap. It's silly. I'm not interested in that. That's beneath me. And so I couldn't speak to him and I didn't have anyone else to speak to. And when I was like reading this and I'm like, well, Gabbie's manipulated Jimmy and now Jimmy's saying this. And then I was like, but is that what's happened? I didn't trust my own judgment, and that's why I took to Twitter and I asked about these things. I was like, am I the bumhole here? Am I in the wrong? Because I didn't know. I didn't trust any of my judgment. And it's not just, I mean, that's the most public example of it, but it was happening constantly behind the scenes. It happened in every video that I posted where I didn't trust my own judgment. I didn't know what to do. It happened in every decision I made in my life. I constantly doubting myself, and it happened for months afterwards. And there's actually a book that's really helped me that's just on the bookcase here. Give me a second. This one here. I'll not show you inside because there's exercises and questions and I've been writing in it and working on things. This is the Gaslighting Recovery Workbook by Amy Marlowe McCoy, and this book has been invaluable to me. It has been fantastic. It goes through what gaslighting is, and it gives examples, and it asks you to find examples in your own life, not just from your partners, but from other people in your life and other times it's happened, and then helps you kind of figure out what went wrong and how to avoid it in the future and how to work through it and how to work through these feelings and get over them and stop doubting yourself and stop feeling like you're going crazy, essentially. And it's wonderful. This book helped me so much in my recovery over the last few months, and I thoroughly recommend it. I'll leave a link down in the description below. This has been brilliant. Really brilliant. So when it comes to gaslighting, that has helped me so much, and I think it was the gaslighting that did the most damage to me. Yeah, working through that stuff, so important. And other things are apparently being cheap. That's kind of Jonnie a little bit, but also because he didn't have any money, so maybe that I'm not going to comment on that one too much. There was never taking responsibility, as in everything being someone else's fault, being master deflectors, that kind of thing. Constantly him. They make up complex excuses and can rationalise anything. When they finally get called out, they're quick to claim they're being persecuted. That was him. Next up is Vanity, in terms of doing everything for show. For example, Jonnie was always waxing his moustache and putting his makeup on and doing his hair, but he never did any work on himself internally. He never wanted to improve himself. He never wanted to cut down on his drinking or his drug use. He never wanted to work on his anger issues, and he never wanted to do anything that wasn't on the outside. Being controlling, that was absolutely him. Being unpredictable, absolutely. And tying this in with his drinking, this was a nightmare. So Jonnie would get through minimum a bottle of wine a night, every single night, and then sometimes he would open a second bottle, or he would start on the whiskey, or he would break out some drugs. It all made him, he was already unpredictable, but this made him more unpredictable, and it was terrifying. There were some nights when I was so scared to be, and he could just turn. It was just the slightest word, the slightest thing, and he would just go. You were constantly walking on eggshells, whether he was drunk or not. The drink just made it worse. There was one night in particular where he'd been so nice throughout the night, and then he opened the second bottle of wine, and I saw him spiraling down and down, and I was terrified. And then the next thing I know, he's throwing things and he's getting angry, and I'm just like cowering in the corner in tears. And it got so bad that I had to spend the night sleeping on a sofa in the same room as his parents, because I was that terrified to be alone with him. And they knew I was, and they knew that if they'd left me alone, he would have hurt me again. There's also a bit here that's quite important to note. It says many people in narcissistic relationships find they start to become more anxious and even less able to regulate their own emotions because they feel as though they're living in chaos and there was nothing they could do about it. And this is exactly what it was like with Jonnie. I was more anxious, I was more upset, my moods were swinging all over the place. I was an absolute wreck because you never knew when it was going to turn with him. So then even when I was on my own, I never knew what my moods were going to be, and it made me worse than I'd ever been before in that respect. Other things are taking advantage of others, reveling in others' misery, doesn't like to be alone, which for Jonnie resulted in kind of triangulation. So not only was this like not wanting to be physically alone, not wanting to not be around other people, but he was very into triangulation. So this was, he would basically always have like at least 2 people on the go, usually girls, but sometimes guys. So this resulted in when he was with his ex years ago, he cheated on her while he was engaged to her with another girl, and then he moved in with that girl while still engaged to the first one and started a relationship and a new life with this one before breaking up with this one. There was a considerable overlap. Then when he's with this one, he gets engaged to her, and then he cheats on her with tens of people, like lots of people. He told me all about them, so many people. And so there's like a period of like 3 years when he is consistently cheating on her with this person, this person, this person, this person, including people who are friends of hers. So, poor woman. I can't believe he made me hate her when she is clearly just another victim of him. And then when he was with me, he was still basically keeping that ex on the hook and still trying to keep her invested while being with me, while still having this like clearly flirtatious thing with his friend Fran and this and this and this and all these other girls and God knows who else. Triangulation. If I left him at any minute, he'd still have these other girls on the hook. If one of those becomes wise to him, it's okay because he's still got me, you know? And that's why I think he was so angry when I was the one to finally do the leaving of him properly, because I think at this point, by the sounds of it, his ex had enough of him as well, and I'd had enough of him. He was actually on his own, and that's why I think he would swing so hard between, in the emails he sent me for those months, trying to get me back and calling me all these disgusting names and sending me death threats. I think that's why he was swinging so wildly, because he was finally on his own and he didn't know how to cope with it. Poor boundaries, constantly with him. Infidelity, again, a serial cheater. I don't know why I thought he'd be different. Actually, no, I know why he thought he'd be different with me. Because he told me I was different. I was special. I was just like, he made me think I wasn't like the other girls. You know, he cheated on them, but he wouldn't do that with me. You know, I was too different. I was too special. I had something they didn't. I was better than them in this and this and this way. And no, screw that. He's still a cheat. He's always going to be a cheat. He's never going to change that. Been doing it for too long. The other things are like being fragile. So for example, if his art is criticised, he'll fall apart, which is, yeah. Carelessness, being seductive, absolutely a thing, yeah. And that's kind of it for the key traits. The other interesting thing though is, based on this last one, is I want to talk about these seductive traits, because a lot of people say, and there have been men, because it's all men who do this, in the comments when I've spoken about this in the past, who've said, typical woman, always going for these people who hurt you, always going for the bad guys, why don't you ever go for a nice guy? That's the thing. He seemed like such a nice guy. He was so nice on the surface. He was charming, he was funny, he was good looking, he was charismatic, he could tell a great story. He spoke to me saying he cared about feminism and pro-LGBT stuff, and he cared about all these issues that I was so passionate about. And I was like, yes, this is a man who gets it. He gets me. He had these seductive traits. So in the book, she writes things like charismatic, charming, confident, intelligent or well-informed, attractive, well put together, passionate, creative, articulate, great branding. They were all Jonnie. And this first few dates and the first times we hung out and the first times we were getting to know each other, that is everything that came across. And when we were kind of on again, off again, on again, off again, he would always win me back by being charming and funny and sweet. And he had these little nicknames for me and Kyra, and he made us feel so special and so loved. And it was all fake. All of it was fake. But it's understandable why you fall for it. It absolutely is. And this is an interesting point, right? On the charisma, charm and confidence, she writes, all of their energy goes into developing the traits and qualities that others see, rather than developing a sense of self. And that is absolutely key. That is absolutely essential. They care about coming across as charming, but they don't actually need to be nice people. They care about coming across as confident, but they don't actually have any self-confidence. They come across as being beautiful on the outside, but they're not nice people on the inside. They say they care about feminism and they put that out into the world, but they're actually misogynistic douchebags. And actually, on that note, there's this bit here that writes, it's not uncommon for relationships with narcissists to be on again, off again, which we were. Their behaviour can become so intolerable that it reaches a fever pitch and you step back. He leaves, you leave, or you kick him out, but he soon realises that other people aren't putting up with his bad behaviour, so he comes back. For you, after a few weeks of being free from the neglect, lack of empathy and all the rest, you forget and then return to the compassionate place of remembering how hard the abandonment is for him, or reflecting on your chemistry together, and you take him back, and the cycle begins again. And this is what kept happening over and over and over. And after you've been away for a while, you forget about the bad things and you focus on this charismatic, confident, lovely front that he's putting on and showing you again, and you fall for it all over again. And for me, breaking the cycle was about finally speaking to my friends. So I spoke to Navadia, I spoke to Sam, and I opened up. And I spoke about it in a video, and I told my sister and made sure she knew. And it stopped me falling back into those old patterns of believing him and falling for his lies, because finally everyone else around me knew what he was like, because I spent so long covering it up. Like, I remember there was this one day where I took a photo of him and Kyra when we were out in the pub, and like, we'd had a lovely afternoon and it was so nice, and he posed for this gorgeous picture with Kyra, and I posted it on Instagram. My sister messaged me saying like, oh my god, I love how much he loves Kyra, and I was like, oh my god, me too. And it didn't matter that he kicked off at me that night at home, and he was throwing stuff around and he threw stuff at me and he pushed me and all this stuff, because in this photo he looked like he loved Kyra, and my sister thought that he loved Kyra, and she thought he looked nice, and I was like, yes, let's keep putting this out into the world, and we can just ignore the other stuff because it'll go away, and it will go away, but it doesn't go away. And so again, this is another lesson for you guys to not believe every single thing you see on social media, because it's curated. And I curated the hell out of that relationship. I posted the great photos we had together and the cute stuff and the good times, and I hid everything else. And I hid the bruises on my wrists when he would grab me, and I hid the arguments and the fighting and the throwing and the kicking and the everything. I hid the violence and the abuse, and I hid the anger and the drinking and the drug abuse and the emotional manipulation. I hid it all, because I wanted you guys to see the lovely, the nice guy that I wanted him to be. That's what I wanted everyone else to see, and I thought that if you all saw that and I presented that enough, that's what he'd become. And eventually he'd come round, and eventually he would be that guy all the time. But of course he never did, because he never will. And now I'm done hiding, and I'm done not speaking about this anymore. And the last time I tried to speak about this, he threatened me, and he threatened my life, and he threatened my career, and he threatened my reputation. And I had a bit of a breakdown on a live stream, because I was like, well, if he's going to threaten me, I'm going to expose his threats. And I didn't know what he was going to do, and I didn't know if he was going to hurt me, because he's clearly hurt me before, and he's threatened to hurt me several times since. And basically the only thing, I was completely alone at the time, and it was around Christmas, and I just thought, if he's going to threaten me, I'm going to make his threats known publicly, so that anything he does will be cut off before he can do it, basically. You guys, some of you, plenty of you saw this. Basically, he sent me some threats, and he sent me death threats, and he said that he could make stuff up about me and ruin my career. He threatened to leak intimate photos of me that he has, probably still has, based on his history. The final straw for me breaking up with him was finding a hard drive he owns with tens of thousands of photos of him having sex with other women, which he told me didn't exist. He told me none of those photos existed, and yet he keeps a hard drive with tens of thousands of them. So I don't doubt he's still got ones of me that he could whip out to threaten me with at any point, but I'm done being scared. He can say what he wants, and I'm sure that if he ever sees this and he responds, he'll be like, she was the crazy one, she was the mean one, she was the this and this and this. And to some extent, I'm sure he actually believes that, but it's not true, and I know it's not true. And there's nothing he can say that can hurt me anymore, because I've come out of this stronger, and I've healed, and I can finally see him for what he is. So there was one night that, towards the end, where I decided I was actually going to test this little theory I had. And pro tip here, but if you feel the need to test your partner on anything, it's not a healthy relationship. But that's beside the point, because I did it, and he absolutely failed. And this is one night, and I could tell he was spoiling for a fight, and he'd been going off on me all day and like picking at little things and little things and little things. And he'd been drinking from probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and I was just not in a good place that day, and I was like, I am not having any alcohol. It's not gonna be good for me. I'm not in the right mindset to drink it, because for me, drinking is like a, you know, you enjoy the taste, you enjoy the socialising, you enjoy the fun. It's it adds a little bit to something. It's not there to drink for the sake of it, you know? And so this one night when I knew I wasn't in a good place, I wasn't drinking, and he kept pushing and pushing and pushing. He was like, have a drink, have a drink, have a drink. And so around maybe 11 p.m, I said, fine, pour me a drink. I'll have a gin and lemonade. And I didn't touch a drop. I didn't have a single sip of that drink. But he thought I did. And the minute he thought I drank, he started on me. And he got nastier, and the names got worse, and the accusations got worse. And the minute I got upset about it, he told me, you're drunk, you're crazy, you can't handle your drink, this is what happens, this is all your fault, you ruin everything when you drink. And I'd not had a drop of alcohol that night, and that again was one of the moments where I realised this isn't all me. Everything he's saying, every fault I have, maybe I need to question it and not just blindly assume it's my fault. And again, that's not to say I don't have faults. I definitely do. I have a lot. But he made me hate myself so much, and now I realise it was with no good reason. And this is why I'm not letting him threaten me anymore. I'm not letting him silence me anymore, and I'm not gonna protect him anymore, because me sharing my story is gonna help other people get out of the situation that I was in. And if I can help just one person find the courage to leave, to go, to stand up to their abuser, this will be worth it. I will take all the threats he can throw at me. I can take any story he will spin and lie about me. I can take any photos he wants to release about me if I can help other people get out and stop being hurt. He can do whatever the hell he wants, because I will not be silenced anymore. And that's why I'm making this video. And that's where I'm going to end things before I get any more emotional. Thank you for watching. Thank you for letting me share my story. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me. Even when it's been hard, and even as I've been recovering, I'm working on things, and I'm going to continue to work on things. The things that really, really got me through were, of course, Kyra. She has been an angel. And she has not only emotionally saved my life by being there for me, but physically. Because of the night that... There's a night in particular that Jonnie got quite physically violent, and I've told this story before, so I don't want to go through it again. But she bit him and she stopped him before he could do any real damage. And for that, I owe this little girl right here my life. And I will never, ever, ever be able to thank her enough. She has been my absolute rock and my best friend and my lifesaver and my support and my everything. So get a dog. But also speaking to other people and telling them what happened, and not even just telling them my story, because that's the thing. You don't need to tell someone your side of things. You don't need to tell them your interpretation. You just tell them the facts, and you tell them what happened, and you tell them all the awful stuff, even the awful things you did. Tell people everything and they'll be on your side because they'll understand. And opening up and being completely honest with people and sharing all these things and telling them that the facts, the story, what happened has made all the difference, because now I have this amazing support network. I have friends I'm closer with than ever, and I have friends who are going to keep me on track. So the times that I wanted to go back, the times that I was falling for his lies and his stories and his I can change and I'll get therapy, my friends kind of kept me on track, and they said no, and they kept me going, and they supported me and they were there for me. So tell people. If you don't have friends, that's okay. Get a counsellor, get a therapist, go to group counselling and therapy, talk to people online. You have so many options and so many resources out there, but talk to people and tell them and let them know what's going on. That's the biggest thing. Other things for me are, like I say, I learn a lot by reading and working through things. So these two books, Should I Stay or Should I Go, and the Gaslighting Recovery Workbook, these two, amongst others, have been absolutely invaluable to me. There's a few others I've read, which again I'll link down in the description below. They have helped me process a lot of stuff and understand a lot of stuff that has happened. They've opened my eyes to things, so that's been really helpful. Talking to counsellors and therapists can really help as well. For me, getting the police involved and having that support there really helped me and made me feel a lot safer. The point is, you have options and you have ways out, and things will get better. And that's what I want people to take away from this and understand and remember. But before I get too emotional and before I keep going and rambling, because I know this is a very long video, but thank you for watching today, thank you for listening, thank you for being part of this journey, and let me finally make this video and speak about the stuff that's been really hard for me for a long time. Oh god, words, I don't even know where I'm going with this sentence. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with some lighter content again very soon, and looking more like myself again, and being back in my usual setting and all the things. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna finish this second small glass of wine and just try and calm myself down a bit. But thank you. I'll see you again soon. I hope you'll have a wonderful rest of your day.